Welcome to the Mad and Crypt Theology podcast. It's so good to be here with you today. And we are excited to have two of our contributors from the spring 2024 issue of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health and Disability who are joining us today. And so we have Vicki and Shauna. So welcome to you both. And we were wondering if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves for us. So Vicki, would you mind going first?
Okay. Well, I'm Reverend Dr. Victoria Marie, but I prefer to be called Vicki. And I live in Vancouver, and I've been in Canada for about 50 years. But I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York, and I just retired from active ministry.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, welcome. And Shauna.
Hi, everyone. So nice to be here. I am currently a PhD candidate at Emmanuel College at the Toronto School of Theology, and my research mostly focuses on trauma and the Christian language of redemption. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. Was there anything else you wanted for the introductions?
Oh, no, that's perfect. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Miriam? Miriam and I already recorded a podcast today, so we're a little fuzzy.
And I've been working on my dissertation, so I'm
Yes.
kind of in that frame of mind. So
That'll do it.
And sorry, but we wondered if you could both summarize your pieces. So maybe Shauna and then Becky can talk about your pieces.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I wrote an article on the last confession of Jeremiah, which is Jeremiah 27-18. And in this confession, Jeremiah goes through a lot of feelings and a lot of experiences of God and a lot of experiences of his own. He's working through a lot of things that are happening in and around his life and in his community at that time. And the way I thought about it was that this confession mirrors and reflects ourselves back to us in our sacred scriptures. They're not meant to, I don't believe, well, Triple says they're not meant to mandate or manufacture change in us, but to be a mirror for us to see ourselves and God in our scriptures. So this paper kind of looks at how might we survive in the wildernesses that we face. And Jeremiah popped out at me when I was thinking of surviving in the wilderness, which is something that Dolores Williams talks about in one of her books. That Jeremiah kind of just came to the forefront like Job does, like some of the lament psalms do. And so I started looking at it. And this one in particular stuck out to me because in it, Jeremiah kind of fights with God and also pulls back and kind of runs away and says, I don't want to do this anymore. And then also says, I wish I had not been born. So completely disengages. And that reminded me of the fight, flight, and freeze responses in trauma theory that I've been reading a lot about in the last few years. So the article wasn't meant to psychologize Jeremiah as a historical figure or have any kind of insight into the prophet's soul, as it were. But what I wanted to do was look at the sacred texts and see what they might show us about ourselves in these moments where we are trying to survive the pain and complexity and paradox that we're experiencing. So that's kind of a little bit about the article. It goes through some of the methodological concerns in trauma theory, and then looks kind of at the confessions more generally, and then this one particular, the last confession of Jeremiah specifically. And then kind of at the end brings it together with Catherine Keller's theology, which I think, although it hasn't really been used in trauma theologies much, I think it's like a really, really generative place. And I'm hoping to see more trauma theology in the future kind of use her work. So I talk about that a little bit. But yeah, I think that's about it for the summary. That's kind of where I go from
Yeah,
and to.
thanks, Hannah, and we'll dig into it more in a minute. And Becky, can you talk about where this piece came from and how your poem came to be?
Okay. Yeah, the poem was kind of a reflection on how, as as a person who's othered, one isn't seen for like as themselves or for themselves. They're seen always through the filter of observers, and it's kind of a plea to say, like, see see what's there in me rather than what you're pasting on me. So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you so much, Vicki, and we'll ask you to read the poem later on in today's episode. So
Well, will one
thank you
of you
so
read
much.
it for me?
Oh, yes, we would be very happy to. Yes, yes, for sure. So I think we'll return now to Shauna's piece, and we cooked up a couple questions for you, Shauna. We wanted to pick your brain on some stuff today. So we were wondering about your opinion on how you see feminist trauma theologies, like how they've been morphing over the past 20 years. We spoke with Sarah Travis earlier this morning because we recorded a podcast episode with her, and we were talking about this too, that like recently I got a chance to teach the subject in class. I'm teaching a class called Mental Health and Christian Theology. And so I was saying to Sarah and Miriam earlier today, I've been kind of like giddy just looking at all the stuff that's like available now when we think about this topic. So what do you think about the direction that's heading and how things have changed over maybe the past 20 years?
Yeah, I'm excited as well, actually, to see where things are going in the new books that are coming out. I think that though there are many feminist theologians that have been using trauma theory for years now in their work, Serene Jones, Shelley Rambo, etc., many others. There's some who might say that there's not really a sort of specific trauma theology necessarily as like a discipline itself, and some are starting to. So Karen O'Donnell and Katie Cross, they're kind of starting to parse out what trauma theology might actually look like as a theological discipline, which I think is really exciting because it's been very nebulous, which is also beautiful. But they're starting to sort of pin down a few things. And they have 2 volumes of essays that they've kind of put together into 2 books. One is called Feminist Trauma Theologies, and the other is I think Bearing Witness, Intersectional Perspectives on Trauma Theology, which is the 2nd volume. And I think together they create something that's really beautiful, and that both are needed. The second volume, Intersectional Perspectives, kind of shows more of the trauma theologies that have existed for the last 20 years, but haven't been published or haven't been noticed in an academic published way, which doesn't mean that they haven't been noticed or haven't been said or written, but that they just are starting to kind of in a structured academic circle, those things are being published, which I think is really exciting. So these vast kind of intersections and complexities that exist in post-traumatic existence, demand this plurality of responses from people, from the church, from academia, from our own theology, and from our actions in the world. And I think this means necessarily that there's plural, like theologies. So you really see that, which is why it's hard to pin down as a discipline, right? Because there's so many theologies that exist and are starting to be kind of mulled over by people in response to a plurality of different experiences in the world. So I think that's really exciting. And I think that the field is starting to be more global, diverse, and thus like much more interesting than it has been. Not to negate all the work that has been done over the last 20 years. I think that this is just like a much more exciting time for those reasons. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Shauna. Yeah, it's exciting to me to hear it's becoming more a global conversation. In some ways, it probably was happening globally, and then people in the West started paying attention to what was happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's, these conversations have existed and have been going on for a really long time, but not everyone has been paying attention. And so I think even in the world of like trauma theology, Septemi Lakawa, who's the president at Jakarta Theological Seminary, has written some like brilliant pieces on trauma and theology. And there's still so many folks who don't know that her name is there. And I'm like, yeah, she's brilliant. Like we need to be reading her stuff alongside all these others. So I think it's just starting to academia is like very slow to catch up on these things, and the church is very slow sometimes to catch on to these things. And I think I'm just starting to see a glimmer of that change. So it's an exciting time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Your piece also was for us, um, how how you found that Jeremiah's experience can mirror and can help people survive their own trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of simply in the fact that so many emotions and so many experiences that are kind of conveyed as happening to one person in the scriptures in the space of what is 7 to 18, so like 11 verses, um, is like a relief when
Yeah.
I read it, because I feel like in the midst of like a post-traumatic remaking of the self, or in the aftermath of a traumatic experience, it can be impossible to streamline anything, and not that we should, but sometimes I think in theology specifically, we do that without meaning to sometimes, or we mean to, because it's easier to have something that's a little bit linear, a little bit clean. Um, and so I think Jeremiah is a relief for me in that sense. And I think, or I know others who have experienced trauma who have found themselves in the scriptures in those ways, in the laments, in Job, in passages like this in Jeremiah, and just that they exist, that we could talk to God this way, that we experience the world in these like big, extreme, intense ways, and that those things exist in the sacred scriptures of our tradition. And sometimes they all happen within 11 verses or in a moment in time.
Yeah. So, when have you been thinking about other ways, along with scripture, we can engage theologically with and for those experiencing trauma?
Yeah, I think about this all the time,
Yeah, I
actually.
know you do.
Um, this is like the big question that spurs my life on, and my PhD work. And I think that these questions, so the Christian tradition has been really good at speaking about suffering since its beginnings, right? Like there's this image of suffering at the center of our tradition, and so that's different than trauma. So experiences of trauma resist that kind of integration where suffering is kind of integrated into your identity throughout time, and trauma doesn't do that. So then how do we speak about God? How do we reconcile when we can't integrate these pieces of ourselves and these theologies or our understandings of God? So that's kind of, I think, the most important task of trauma theology. So how do we reinvent our theologies in ways that allow for that kind of holy disruption? And I think it is holy. So I think practical theology has a really important task there, particularly in churches where liturgies have been saying and singing things for centuries that can be harmful and have hurt some, and where the people in the pews or the chairs or benches have vastly different experiences and understandings of God, and to start being more aware of that. So practical theology and our churches to begin to be more aware and take trauma into serious consideration when planning a service or any sort of spiritual kind of reflection, particularly where the person speaking has power and responsibility to do so. And then personally, I think it's very important as well. So as Christians, I believe we're called to witness suffering. And this includes trauma. I would say we're called to witness trauma and to come alongside people in places that are dark and scary and overwhelming. And I think our scriptures argue for us to do that. Go to these places and do not reject them. Engage God in these experiences, and engage others who are experiencing these things in our lives without looking away in practical ways, you know. So something I would say that's kind of small, but like really not small at all, is to practice not looking away. So when you're riding the bus or you're walking through a city or a neighborhood, your own city and neighborhood, wherever you are, begin noticing where you want to look away from things, people, and then ask yourself why. Why do I want to look away in this instance? Am I uncomfortable? Am I unsafe? Those are different things. And then as you go through this, start to notice why you might want to look away in those instances. Ask yourself, how the theologies that you grew up with, your understandings of God, are bound up in those kind of learned responses to those around you in your own neighborhoods. And so, like I say, it's kind of a small thing, but it's not really small, to learn to pay attention. And then once you notice, to not look away, to engage in those experiences, I think is something that we're called to do.
Well, that is very cool, Shauna. Thank you. I like this idea of not looking away. And I really appreciate too with your piece that you brought some scripture into the conversation, because practical theology can kind of shy away from scripture, I find. There can be a lot of theologizing and a lot of, oh, we don't want to touch the scripture. So appreciate that you went there and you like pulled Jeremiah into this. That's into the mess of trauma. I kind of like that it's a mess. I kind of like that we don't know the answers sometimes when it comes to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems kind of, maybe it's my life is a mess, so it feels familiar. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, it feels like a good place to be right now. So thank you, Shauna, for writing that.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah. So now we're going to turn to Vicki's poem. And Vicki, I think I'm going to read it for us. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this poem is called To Know and Grow. Bruised, abused, living in unloving soil. Hold tight, take flight, escape from this crippling coil. Wild youth, forsooth, kept finding myself in hostile places, despairing, heart tearing, will I ever find welcoming spaces? Black skin is sin, is what they want me to feel. Yet I know as I grow, such thinking cannot be real. As I age, channel my rage into fighting fallacious surety, to fight for what's right, traveling the road to maturity, to preach hate speech against those you think defenseless is the sin, not our skin. Showing your words false and senseless, begin to see a glimmer in me of all that I have forgiving black skin, not sin, but an ebony, love-filled living. I'm one plot on one spot, on soil fed by gladness and woe. Part in a field in which I'm sealed, surrounded by others who know. I've learned, discerned, love cannot thrive alone. When dismayed, I prayed for hearts made of flesh, not stone. Black skin, like within, black soul's precious wisdom pearls. Look, you'll see my black folks' mystery is to show how true love unfurls in spite of our plight. We manage to live, to survive, love, resistance, persistence, tools people of color use to thrive. We ignore the deep sore dealt by a hateful sister or brother. I hope we grow to know compassionate for all and each other. Yes, to know and grow with compassion for all and each other.
Thank you.
What a beautiful poem. Thank you.
Such beautiful words, Carrie. So much meaning as poetry can. Before we dig into your magnificent words, we're both big fans of Catholic worker. So we wondered if you could talk about your ministry with the Vancouver Catholic worker.
Yeah. Yeah, we started the Vancouver Catholic Worker back in 1998. And we were very taken by Dorothy Day and her writings and Peter Moore and all that. And so before we actually started the house, we went and visited a few Catholic workers in Washington State because they were the closest ones. And we decided like we weren't going to have like a specific who we would help. It's sort of like who God sent us kind of thing. And we didn't know what we were doing. So we learned a lot along the way. And we didn't want to put on, because really, I don't know if you know the downtown east side of Vancouver, Forest Postal Code of Canada, yada yada. but we wanted to kind of not preach, but preach by example. So we didn't uh, ask people to join us in worship stuff, but they could. They were always invited to. And it was a small single family home. So it wasn't like an institutional thing. It was like we were home for the people who came to us. And we did, we had about over 200 people come through our doors up until 2015 when we did a renovation and made the house more spiffy. But then COVID hit in 2020. But even then, we're still on a smaller scale because now I have health issues that interfere with my immune system. So we have to be careful. But uh, we still have somebody living with us. And two of us started it. Three of us, Sarah, Bjorkness, and myself, and this person, Harold. But we decided after the first year that Harold was kind of not, um, he was making some people feel uncomfortable. So, uh, so this month is 26 years that we've been in the Catholic work. So you can ask me some questions more about the Catholic worker if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm like in awe, and I mean, I had to read Dorothy Day's memoir from my exams, and so I am also a huge fan, a huge fan. So so how many people, you said you have one person living in the house with you right now?
Oh, besides the two main persons, there's one
Yeah.
person. Oh, I forgot to say, we also are very big on social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember we went to the 25th anniversary of the Las Vegas Catholic worker, and
Mm-hmm.
then we went to that nuclear place, the strategic something. And so we've done stuff like that in the States. And then here at home, we do a lot, like with the pipeline, stuff like that. I
Mm-hmm.
got arrested at Kinder Morgan.
Oh my, yes.
So
Yes.
it's,
Yeah.
it's the spiritual part,
Mm.
which is motivated by the justice part.
That's amazing. And if folks wanted to read more about the Vancouver Catholic Worker, is there a website that you would recommend?
Yeah, we have a website
Okay,
and
and maybe we can
and a
link it at the
Facebook
bottom.
page.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we can link that for sure. At the bottom of the episode. That's great.
And we used to have a newsletter, but we ran out of steam.
I ended
Totally get it.
yeah.
Because right now, Sarah's the only one who is working
Okay.
And I'm long in the tooth, so I'm not working.
Faithful and wise. So, more in relation to your poem, in your author's note and in your poem, you refer to how there have been harmful theologies, equating blackness with sin and whiteness with goodness. And uh, we wanted to say how we wanted to hear both how you have resisted these racist theologies and how there can be solidarity in resisting such racism and such sin, and how have and along with that question, how your own theology has changed or been impacted over the years.
Yeah. First of all, those of us who are racialized, we also buy into the reading narrative, right? And we sort of have to, or hopefully we can finally disengage and distill like the message, say, of Christianity and of Christ, distill it from all its cultural and power-laden overtones. So when I see myself as evolving, because it's always evolving, it's that I'm seeing that there's a lot of patina on the Christian message, right? And how can I say this? Like, for instance, in one of my art projects, I did a thing on ancestors, going back to my African ancestors and others. And it got me to thinking of how Christianity um, was actually a tool of empire. Like, and we know that in the Canadian context with residential schools and all that. And in the African context, it's the same. And in racism is a tool to uh, make hierarchies of people, but those hierarchies are usually in the service of power of the state and for um, for Christianity and even in Islam, the core essence of whatever the theology is, you sort of have to, you know, with wood when you take off all the varnish that's been put over the years. And so I don't think my theology has changed. I think that as I get older, I'm uncovering all that varnish that's been placed over it.
Yeah, thank Vicki. That's such a powerful image of remembering what's at the heart of faith and at the heart of the life and ministry of Jesus.
So now we come to the point in the podcast where I think it's my favorite part, where we turn the mic over to you both, so to speak, to see if you have any questions that you'd like to ask each other after reading each other's pieces. So Shauna, I wonder if you have a question that you'd like to ask Vicki.
I have very many, but I'll start with one. Vicki, so nice to hear some of your work and experience, and that's so funny that the house in 2015 you said was put on hold to be made more spiffy, and in 2015 I came to the downtown east side and worked and volunteered for about 8 years in those years where that house wasn't. That's funny, we just missed each other. But I was thinking as I read your poem, one of the things that stood out to me among many was the line "one plot on one spot." And I wondered, in the context of your work in the downtown east side, what does place have to do with it? What is, or how do you understand that line, "one plot on one spot"?
That's interesting. I haven't thought of it in terms of that, but one of the things that when we decided to buy the house as opposed to rent the house is we wanted to be there. So we wanted to be that one spot where people could come if they're looking for us. So yeah, so place means a lot.
And then also, if you hadn't thought of it in that way before, I'd love to know more about how you were thinking about that line when you wrote the poem itself.
Mm. I'm trying to remember now. I guess part of what I mean is that it's kind of hard to frame, but I'm one example of the other examples that are been misunderstood or misjudged or whatever. And yeah, so it's it's almost like allowing to search out the other plots and the other spots. Because I wrote this, I think, around the time there was something happening in the States when it wasn't George Floyd, it was before that, but some other thing. And it just, yeah, I don't write poetry often, but it's one way that I can get out how I'm feeling.
Beautiful. I'm glad that you wrote it so we could read it and talk about it. Read it a couple times with goosebumps. Beautiful.
Yeah. I can I ask Shauna now?
Yes, please. Go for it.
I like as I said, I finished active ministry. But when I read your piece, and I hadn't heard of trauma theology before, I must admit. But it made me think of how, as homilists or preachers or whatever, how so often we gloss over the difficult parts, right? And in the lectionary, I don't think I've ever seen this, but it's it's a scripture that people need to know about, to read, because it's okay, like you say in your paper. It's okay if you're not like going through this. You have to wrestle with this, and that was uh, it was almost like, oh, I wish I could go write a sermon on this. But I think that work is so important, and letting people know that, you know, it doesn't have to be all okay in the end. Like you can wrestle through it. And that sort of goes throughout your paper. And that was so refreshing to me and healing in a way. So thank you.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I struggle sometimes theologically or thinking theologically about, oh, because so much of the Christian story is eschatology, hope, redemption, and those things are not inherently bad. I don't think. I just struggle with them so much. And you might be able to have seen that in the paper. I'm like trying to find language, right, to say, okay, we can exist in this space without rejecting a different reality, which can sometimes be better than our current reality, without rejecting or dismissing the pain of the now, right? I know Shelley Rambo talks about it, death and life existing together. And I thought, oh, when I first read her words on that, I thought, oh my goodness, that's like the Christian story, right? Death and life together. Like, okay, there has to be something here existing, kind of moving around each other somehow, um, without one overtaking the other. Yeah.
And the other theme I think in your piece is how we kind of get afraid to get mad at God,
Yeah.
you know?
Yes.
And so it's by getting mad at God and going through your thing doesn't mean you don't love God, but you're struggling through this, whatever. And and I think that was a good point that you brought out in your paper.
Oh, thank you. I remember actually I think I was a teenager, so angsty at that point in my life. I'm still angsty, but even more so then, or newer to it, I guess. But I said, I was struggling with this thing about being angry at God, right? And someone said to me, well, so simple, like, even if you pretend that you're not, God knows that you are anyway, so you might as well feel it and say it, right? Be honest, because it's what it is, right? It's our human response to whatever we're experiencing. Yeah. So I thought, so simple and so good.
Yeah, I think I was a similar teenager because my confirmation teacher told me, oh, God can take it. God, God takes all emotions and yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a powerful conversation about two powerful contributions to the journal. So we wanted to thank you so much for sharing your book and your time and your thoughts today with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and for liking my poem.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Hope you both contribute again one day.
Thanks.
Thank
Lovely to
you.
be with you all.